The message arrived at 3 in the morning, Seoul time. Every screen on Earth flickered for exactly 2 seconds before returning to normal. Most people thought it was a glitch. They were wrong. Deep beneath the city, in a bunker that officially did not exist, Admiral Kong Tae stood before a wall of holographic displays. His uniform was crisp, his silver hair cut short, and his eyes held the calm of a man who had prepared for this moment his entire life. Around him, officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. No one panicked. They had trained for this. "The translation is complete, Admiral," said Dr. Park Yuna. She was young for her position, barely 40, but she had spent 20 years studying theoretical alien languages. Now, for the first time, she had a real one to translate. Her hands were steady as she handed him the tablet. Tae read the message slowly. His expression did not change. "Read it aloud," he said. "Everyone should hear this." Yuna cleared her throat. "Species designation: human. Your system has been selected for integration into the Velrak Dominion. You have 14 standard cycles to disband all military forces and prepare for genetic cataloging. Resistance will result in complete extinction. This is not a negotiation. This is your notice." The room remained silent. Officers exchanged glances but continued their work. They had all known this day might come. Humanity had been broadcasting signals into space for over 400 years. Someone was bound to answer eventually. "How many ships?" Tae asked. 12,000 confirmed," replied Captain Lee Han from his station. He was a tall man with sharp features and the kind of focus that made him invaluable in crisis situations. Long-range sensors picked them up near the edge of the system. "They're moving fast, but not rushing. They think this will be easy." "What do we know about the Velrak?" Yuna pulled up files on her screen. "They've conquered over 300 star systems. Dozens of species live under their rule, most as slaves. Their military technology is advanced, but follows predictable patterns. They rely on overwhelming force rather than strategy. They've never faced serious resistance." Tae nodded slowly. He walked to the main display, where the approaching fleet appeared as a cloud of red dots moving steadily toward Earth. 12,000 ships, each one capable of destroying a city. It was the largest invasion force in recorded galactic history, sent to conquer a species that had never left its own solar system. "Send a response," Tae said. "Sir?" Yuna looked surprised. "What kind of response?" "A warning." The officers stopped working. Several turned to look at their commander. "A warning? To an armada of 12,000 warships?" Tae's expression remained calm. "Dr. Park, I want you to send them this message in their own language. Make sure there is no confusion about our meaning." He dictated the words slowly. "This is your only warning. Turn back. We do not wish for war, but we are prepared for it. You have miscalculated." Yuna typed the message and translated it carefully. She checked her work 3 times before sending it. The transmission took only seconds to reach the Velrak fleet. The response came within the hour. High Commander Torak of the Crimson Fleet appeared on their screens. He was tall and covered in dark scales, with 4 eyes that glowed faintly orange. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship stretched into darkness, filled with hundreds of officers. "We received your message, humans," Torak said. His voice was deep and filled with amusement. "It has been shared among my officers. They found it entertaining. We have destroyed civilizations that controlled entire galaxies. You control one small planet. Your warning means nothing." The transmission ended. Tae watched the empty screen for a long moment. Then he turned to his officers. "Well," he said quietly, "we tried." He walked to a console at the center of the room and placed his hand on a scanner. The system recognized him instantly. "Admiral Kang Tae, Supreme Commander, Earth Defense Council. Voice authorization confirmed." "Begin protocol Songdo," Tae said. The bunker hummed as systems that had been sleeping for decades came alive. Across the planet, similar facilities received the signal. In the depths of the ocean, in the hearts of mountains, in orbit around the moon, humanity's true defenses began to wake. Captain Lee Hyun watched the displays change. New icons appeared throughout the solar system, thousands of them. In locations that had been marked as empty space or dead asteroids, Sir Haon said, his voice tight with something between excitement and fear. The sleepers are responding. Good Tay turned to face his officers. 300 years ago, our ancestors looked at the stars and wondered what was out there. They hoped for friends. They prepared for enemies. Every generation since then has added to our defenses, improved our weapons, and trained for this exact moment. He pointed at the red dots moving toward Earth. Those invaders see a primitive species. They see easy prey. They see slaves waiting to be collected. His voice hardened. They are about to learn how wrong they are. Una looked up from her station. Admiral, what should I tell the other nations? The public. Tell them the truth, Tay said. Tell them that we were threatened. Tell them that we responded with a fair warning. And tell them that when that warning was ignored, we had no choice left. He paused, looking at the approaching fleet one more time. Tell them that humanity is at war. The message went out to every leader, every military base, every home on Earth. People gathered in the streets. Looking up at the sky, they could not see the enemy yet, but they knew it was coming. There was fear, of course. How could there not be? But there was something else, too. A quiet determination that had been built into human culture over centuries of preparation. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment they had been warned about. The moment they had been promised would come in homes across the planet. Parents held their children and spoke words that had been passed down through generations. If they come for us, we will be ready. And in the bunker beneath Seoul, Admiral Kong Tae watched the enemy approach and felt something he had not expected. He felt calm because Torek was right about one thing. Humanity did control only one small planet, but that planet had been preparing for 300 years. Every asteroid, every moon, every inch of space around their home had been turned into a fortress. The Velrak thought they were coming to collect slaves. They were walking into a trap. The Velrak Armada crossed the outer edge of the solar system like a wave of darkness. 12,000 warships moved in perfect formation, their engines burning bright against the cold emptiness of space. From the bridge of his flagship, High Commander Torak watched the approach with growing impatience. Where are their defenses? He demanded his officers check their sensors again. Nothing, Commander. No ships, no stations, no orbital platforms. The humans appear to have no military presence beyond their planet. Torek made a sound of disgust. Cowards. They hide on their rock and hope we will pass them by. He turned to his tactical officer. Send the scout ships ahead. I want to know everything about their planet before we arrive. 20 fast ships broke from the formation and accelerated toward the inner system. They passed the frozen worlds at the edge, then the gas giants with their countless moons. Their sensors found nothing but dead rock and swirling storms. On one of Jupiter's moons, Commander Choi Nari watched the scout ships pass overhead. She sat in the cockpit of her fighter, systems powered down, drifting in the shadow of a crater. Around her, 39 other pilots waited in silence. They were the Ghost Wing, humanity's first and best stealth squadron. Their ships were covered in materials that absorbed every type of sensor scan. They produced no heat, no radiation, no signal of any kind. To the Velrak sensors, they were simply part of the moon. Let them pass, Nari whispered into her radio. We're not here for scouts. Lieutenant Bae-sung, her second-in-command, responded with a click of acknowledgement. He was a former engineer who had helped design these ships before becoming one of their pilots. He knew exactly what they could do. The scout ships continued toward Earth, sending back reports of a defenseless system. Torak received these reports with satisfaction. He had expected at least some resistance. This was almost disappointing. Order the supply ships to move to the center of the formation, he commanded. We'll need them close when we begin the occupation. The supply ships were massive, slow vessels that carried everything the Armada needed. Food, fuel, ammunition, repair equipment. Without them, the warships could fight for a few days at most. Torak considered them perfectly safe in the middle of 12,000 armed vessels. He was wrong. The Ghost Wing had been drifting toward those supply ships for 6 hours. 40 pilots, moving without engines, using only the gravity of moons and planets to adjust their course. It was the most difficult flying any of them had ever done. One mistake would send them spinning into open space or crashing into a Velrak hull. Nayar reached the first supply ship just after midnight. Time. She positioned her fighter against the vessel's hull, matching its movement perfectly. Then she opened her cockpit and stepped into space. The device she carried was small enough to fit in one hand. A quantum disruptor. It would bond with the ship's hull at the atomic level and then, at a signal, tear that hull apart from the inside. She placed it carefully, activated it with a touch, and returned to H. A fighter. Across the formation, 39 other pilots did the same thing. An hour later, the Ghost Wing was gone, drifting back toward Jupiter's moons as silently as they had come. The Velrak never knew they had been there. Torak was eating his evening meal when the first supply ship exploded. He dropped his food and ran to the bridge. By the time he arrived, 3 more ships had been destroyed. His officers were screaming at each other, trying to understand what was happening. "Are we under attack?" Torak demanded. "Don't know." His tactical officer shouted, "There's nothing on sensors. No enemy ships, no weapons, fire, nothing." Another explosion lit up the darkness. Then another. Then 5 more at once. In the chaos, no one noticed the small message that appeared on the fleet's communication system. Lieutenant Baesung had sent it from 500,000 kilometers away. That was not our attack. That was us saying hello. By the time the explosion stopped, 18 supply ships had been destroyed. The Armada had lost a quarter of its supplies without firing a single shot. Without seeing a single enemy, Torak stood on his bridge, surrounded by panicking officers, and felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest. Fear. He crushed it quickly. He was High Commander of the Crimson Fleet. He had destroyed civilizations. He would not be frightened by a few explosions. "It changes nothing," he announced to his officers. "We have enough supplies to reach Earth and complete our mission. These humans think they can frighten us with tricks. They are wrong. Continue the advance." The Armada moved forward, but the mood had changed. Officers watched their sensors with new attention. Pilots flew tighter formations. Everyone was waiting for the next attack. It did not come. The humans had made their point and disappeared. That, somehow, was worse than continued fighting. Back on Earth, Admiral Kung Tae received the battle report. Commander Choi Nari and all 40 pilots had returned safely. Not a single human had been lost. "Excellent work," Tae said. "What is the enemy's response?" "They're continuing toward Earth," Huon reported. "But slower now. They're being more careful." "Good, let them be careful. Let them wonder what else we have prepared." Tae turned to the holographic display showing the entire solar system. "Initiate Phase 2. Wake the Mars installations." Across the system, signals traveled at the speed of light. On the Red Planet, facilities that had been silent for a century began to power up. Weapons platforms extended from beneath the surface. Sensor arrays came online, mapping every ship in the approaching fleet. Dr. Park Yuna watched the data stream across her screen. "Sir, should we send another warning?" Tae considered the question. "No. We gave them their chance. Now they learn the price of ignoring it." On the Velrak flagship, Torak tried to restore order among his officers. He gave speeches about strength and destiny. He reminded them of every victory they had won. He promised them glory when Earth fell. But late at night, when he was alone in his quarters, he found himself thinking about that message. That was us saying hello. If that was hello, what would goodbye look like? He pushed the thought away and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, they would reach the inner system. Tomorrow, they would crush whatever pathetic defenses these humans had built. Tomorrow, everything would return to normal. But deep down, in a part of his mind he refused to acknowledge. Torak was beginning to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The humans had warned him. He had laughed now. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he was not laughing anymore. The Velrak Armada reached Mars on the 7th day. Torak had spent those 7 days rebuilding confidence among his officers. Yes, they had lost supply ships. Yes, the humans had tricks. But tricks could not defeat 12,000 warships. Victory was still certain. Then they saw Mars. "Commander," his sensor officer said, voice shaking. "We have a problem." Torak looked at the display. The red planet hung in space like a rusted coin. Around it, forming a perfect sphere of protection, were defense platforms. Hundreds of them. They had not been there when the scout ships passed through. Where did those come from? Torak demanded. "They were hidden, Commander. Buried beneath the surface. They emerged while we were dealing with the supply ship attacks." Torak studied the platforms carefully. They were small compared to his warships. Barely armed, it seemed. Their design was simple, almost primitive. "Destroy them," he ordered. "They're just defensive stations. Our fleet will crush them." The first wave of Velrak ships accelerated toward Mars. 500 warships, more than enough to destroy any planetary defense. Their weapons charged, ready to reduce the platforms to debris. The platforms fired first, but they did not fire weapons. Not in any way Torak understood. Instead, space itself seemed to twist around his ships. The warships crumpled like paper, compressed by invisible forces. Metal screamed. Hulls collapsed. Engines exploded. In 30 seconds, 500 ships were gone. Torak stared at the display in disbelief. What was that? What did they hit us with? His science officers scrambled to analyze the attack. "Gravitational weapons, Commander. The platforms project concentrated gravity fields." Our ships were torn apart by their own weight. "That's impossible. That technology doesn't exist." "It does now, Commander." On Mars Station, General Moonday watched the battle from the command center. He was an old man with scars on his face and hands earned in wars fought long before the Velrak arrived. Around him, soldiers and engineers monitored every platform, every weapon, every ship. "First wave destroyed," his tactical officer reported. "No damage to our installations." Day nodded. "Dr. Shin, your weapons work exactly as promised." Dr. Shin Mina stood nearby, watching her creation in action. She had spent her entire career developing Project Hammer. The gravitational weapons were based on theories that had been considered fantasy when she started. Now they were destroying an alien armada. "They'll adapt," she warned. "They'll find ways to counter the gravity fields. We can't win with just this." "We don't need to win," Day replied. "We just need to hurt them enough that they become desperate. Desperate enemies make mistakes." Torak proved her right within the hour. Furious at his losses, he ordered a massive assault. 2,000 ships charged at the Mars defense line, spreading out to avoid concentrated fire. Some would fall, he knew. But others would break through and destroy the platforms. The platforms adjusted their targeting. Gravity fields reached out like invisible hands, catching ships and crushing them. But the Velrak were right. The weapons could not target everything at once. 300 ships broke through the line and began firing on the platforms. Then the second surprise revealed itself. Hidden among the asteroids near Mars, human warships emerged. Not many, just 50 vessels. But each one was built for exactly this kind of fight. Captain Lee Hyun commanded the lead ship, the Hansen. "All ships, engage," Hyun ordered. The Hansen led the charge into the scattered Velrak ships. Human vessels were smaller but faster, designed for quick strikes and rapid retreats. They dove between enemy ships, firing at weak points, and vanishing before return fire could find them. The 300 Velrak ships that had broken through the defense line found themselves trapped, gravity weapons behind them, human warships around them. They fought back, but their formation had already broken. They were dying one by one. On his flagship, Torak watched his fleet being torn apart. He had lost nearly 3,000 ships. 3,000. Against a species that was supposed to have no military. "Full tactical scan," he ordered, his voice cold. "I want to know everything about this system. Everything." His officers worked frantically. As the data came in, Torak felt his confidence crumble. There were weapons hidden throughout the solar system. On every moon, in every asteroid belt, orbiting every planet, the humans had not just built defenses around their homeworld, they had turned their entire star system into a fortress. Along, Torak whispered, "How long have they been preparing?" His science officer checked the data twice before answering. "Some of these installations are over 300 years old, Commander. They've been building since before they knew we existed." 300 years. While his empire had been conquering the galaxy, confident in their power, these humans had been quietly preparing, building, waiting back on Earth. Council Speaker Ohana addressed the planet. Her face appeared on every screen. Her voice reached every home. 300 years ago, our ancestors made a decision. They looked at the stars and knew that someday something would come. They hoped for peace. They prepared for war. They called this the Soul Doctrine. She paused, letting the words sink in. Every generation since then has added to our defenses. Our parents built weapons. Their parents built stations. Their parents began the great work that protects us today. We are not a young species facing an old empire. We are a prepared species facing an arrogant one. Across Earth, people listened in silence. Fear was still there, but something else was growing. Pride, hope, the understanding that they were not helpless. The Volrak thought we would surrender, Ohana continued. They thought we would bow down and accept chains. They were wrong. We gave them a warning. They ignored it. Now, they will learn what that missed. Ache costs. In orbit around Mars, the battle continued. But the momentum had shifted. The Velrak were no longer advancing. They were retreating, trying to regroup, trying to understand what had happened. General Munde watched them fall back and allowed himself a small smile. Phase 3 ready. He asked, "Ready, sir?" Good, let them catch their breath. Let them think they understand what they're facing. His smile grew colder. Then show them how wrong they are. Torak gathered his remaining commanders in the flagship's war room. 9,000 ships remained from the original 12,000. 3,000 lost in just 2 engagements. The mood was dark, the silence heavy. "We have 2 choices," Torak said. "We retreat and admit defeat to a species we dismissed as primitive. Or we push forward with everything we have and end this." His commanders exchanged uncertain looks. Retreat meant shame. It meant explaining to the Dominion Council how they had lost 3,000 ships to a single planet. Their careers would end. Their families would suffer. Death in battle would be preferable. "Full assault," one commander said finally. "Throw everything at Earth at once. No formations. No careful approaches. Just overwhelming force." Others nodded in agreement. It was not elegant. It was not tactical. But it might work. 9,000 ships against whatever defenses remained. Surely that would be enough. Torak accepted the plan. All ships, maximum speed toward Earth. Destroy anything that moves. This ends today. The Armada abandoned its careful formations and charged toward the blue planet in the distance. Ships spread out across a vast area of space, making it impossible for gravity weapons to catch them all. They had learned from Mars. They would not make the same mistake. Admiral Kangte watched the charge from his command center. Around him, officers tracked every enemy ship, plotting trajectories, calculating arrival times. They're coming in scattered. Captain Lee Hyun reported from the Hansen, now positioned near Earth's orbit. "No formation at all. They've given up on strategy," Goodtay replied. "Desperate enemies are predictable enemies." "Signal Vice Admiral Yoon. Tell her it's time." Deep in the asteroid belt, Vice Admiral Yoon Jin received the message. She was a patient woman, the kind who could wait for hours without moving, watching, planning. She had been waiting in this asteroid field for 3 days, her fleet hidden among the rocks. "All ships, power up," she ordered. "Targets are approaching. Wait for my command." 400 heavy cruisers came to life. These were not the small, fast ships that had fought at Mars. These were humanity's fists. Heavily armored, carrying weapons designed to punch through anything. They had been held in reserve for exactly this moment. The Velrak, Armada passed the asteroid belt without noticing the hidden fleet. Their sensors were focused forward, toward Earth, toward the prize they had been promised. They did not think to look behind them. Yoon waited until the last enemy ship had passed. Then she gave the order. All ships, engage from behind. Lock down their escape routes. The reserve fleet emerged from the asteroids like wolves from the forest. They fell upon the rear of the Velrak formation with devastating precision. Ships that had been racing toward Earth suddenly found themselves under attack from behind. Torak received the reports with growing horror. Ships behind us. Where did they come from? The asteroid belt commander. They were hiding there the whole time. How many? 400 heavy cruisers. It was not enough to destroy his fleet, but it was enough to trap it. Ahead, Earth's orbital defense network came online. Weapons platforms that had been dormant for centuries opened fire. Missiles, energy beams, and more gravity weapons reached out to meet the charging armada. Behind them, Yoon's fleet cut off any retreat. The Velrek were caught in a crossfire, but humanity wanted more than just victory. They wanted witnesses. Sergeant Major Han Wu led the boarding parties. 50 teams of Marines, the best soldiers humanity had, launched toward Velrock command ships and armored shuttles. Their mission was simple: capture officers, secure communication equipment, broadcast everything to the galaxy. Han Wu's team targeted a command cruiser near the center of the battle. They breached the hull with cutting charges and stormed through the corridors. Velrak soldiers fought back, but they were not prepared for close combat. Their empire had relied on conquest through superior numbers, not skill. Humanity had been fighting itself for thousands of years. Bridge secured, Han Wu reported after 15 minutes of brutal fighting. We have their communication systems. Back on Earth, Dr. Park Yuna worked quickly. She connected to the captured systems and sent a signal to every species in the Velrak Dominion. Every slave world, every conquered civilization, every corner of the empire received the same broadcast. Attention. This is the human species of the Sol system. We are currently engaged in battle with the Velrak invasion fleet. Watch. The galaxy watched. They saw 9,000 Velrak warships being systematically destroyed by a species that had never left its home system. They saw the greatest military force in known space being torn apart by gravity weapons and human cruisers. They saw the invincible Dominion being defeated on a world called Talar. A species that had been enslaved for 3,000 years gathered around screens and watched in silence. They saw their masters falling. They saw hope. On a dozen other worlds, similar scenes played out. Conquered peoples saw the Velrak losing. Many wept. Many began to whisper words that had been forbidden for generations. Rebellion. Freedom. Revenge. In the battle itself, the Velrak fleet was dying. 8,000 ships became 6,000, then 4,000, then 2,000. Torak's flagship fought desperately, but it was surrounded. Escape was impossible. A human shuttle docked with the flagship. Marines stormed through the corridors, fighting their way to the bridge. When they arrived, they found Torak waiting for them. You've lost, Captain Li Hun told him through the communication system. Your fleet is destroyed. Your empire is watching. Admiral Kung Tae offers you a chance to surrender. Torak stood alone on his bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his officers. He looked at the displays showing his dying fleet. 9,000 ships had followed him to this place. Now less than 1,000 remained, and those were being picked off one by one. Why? He asked. You were nothing. A single planet. How did you do this? We warned you, Hien replied simply. You didn't listen, but the galaxy thought you were primitive. Every scan, every report said you had no military power. We know what the galaxy thought. We wanted you to think that. We hid our strength because we knew that someday someone would come. And we knew that the best defense is one your enemy doesn't know exists. Torak was silent for a long moment. Then he straightened his uniform and raised his chin. I am High Commander of the Crimson Fleet. I do not surrender. Grant me the death I deserve. Jan relayed the request to Admiral Tae. The answer came back quickly. He fought with honor at the end. Give him what he asks. A single shot ended Torak's command. His flagship was captured, its record secured, its communication systems still broadcasting to the galaxy. The battle was over. The Velrek Armada was destroyed. Less than 200 ships survived to retreat, carrying word of the disaster back to Dominion space. Humanity had won, and the entire galaxy had watched them do it. 3 months after the battle, the galaxy was still burning, not with weapons, but with change. The broadcast of the Velrok defeat had spread to every corner of known space. Species that had been enslaved for thousands of years watched their masters fall, and watching, they remembered something they had forgotten: hope on Talar. The first rebellion began within days of the broadcast. Workers in the mining colonies stopped working. Soldiers who had served the Dominion for generations turned their weapons on their commanders. Within weeks, the entire planet was free for the first time in 3,000 years. Similar stories repeated across Dominion space. Some rebellions succeeded. Others were crushed. But the fear was gone. The Velrak had seemed invincible. Now everyone knew they were not. Ambassador Kuan Yun arrived at Galactic Neutral Station on a clear morning. By Earth's calendar, the station floated in space, claimed by no empire, a meeting place for species who needed to talk without fighting. It had existed for 10,000 years. Nothing important had happened there for most of that time. Today was different. Representatives from 100 species waited for the human ambassador. Some were curious. Some were frightened. Some were desperately hopeful. Kuan Yun walked through the station's corridors with her head held high, aware that every eye was on her. She was not what they expected. No weapons, no armor. Just a woman in simple clothing walking alone. The species that had destroyed the greatest armada in history had sent a single person to speak for them. The Galactic Council waited in the Great Chamber. Elder Moros, a being of ancient power who had seen empires rise and fall, spoke first. "You are the humans." "I am Ambassador Kuan Yun," she replied. "I speak for humanity. You destroyed 12,000 Velrak warships. We defended ourselves against an invasion." Moros leaned forward. "And what do you want now? Conquest? Revenge? The Dominion is weak. You could take their empire." Kuan Yun shook her head slowly. "We don't want an empire. We never did. We wanted to be left alone, to live our lives, to explore space at our own pace. The Velrak forced us to fight." "Then why broadcast the battle? Why show the galaxy your victory?" "Because your galaxy is built on fear," Kuan Yun said. "The Velrak ruled through fear. Other empires maintain power through fear. Everyone is afraid of everyone else. We wanted to show that fear can be overcome." The chamber was silent. No one had ever spoken to the council this way. A smaller figure pushed through the crowd of representatives. Prelate Voss of the Talari was old and worn, his body bent from decades of labor under Velrak rule. But his eyes burned with something new. "Ambassador," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My people have been slaves for generations. We watched your battle. We watched you defeat our masters. Now we are fighting for our freedom. But the Dominion is sending more ships. They will crush us." He fell to his knees before her. "Please, help us." Kuan Yun looked down at the old man, then at the watching representatives. This was the moment. The choice that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "Stand up, prelate," she said gently. "Humans don't ask others to kneel." She helped him to his feet, then addressed the entire chamber. "We don't seek war. We didn't want this fight. But we understand something that many in this galaxy have forgotten. Freedom is not given. It is taken. It is defended. It is earned with blood and sacrifice." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We will not conquer for you. We will not fight your wars for you. But if you choose to fight for yourselves, if you stand up against those who would enslave you, humanity will stand with you." Prelate Voss wept openly. Around the chamber, Other representatives from conquered species began to whisper among themselves. For the first time, someone was offering them something other than submission. Elder Morose rose from his seat. You speak of changing the order of the galaxy. The Velrak Dominion has existed for 10,000 years. Other empires have ruled for longer. You are a single species from a single system. What makes you think you can challenge all of this? Kuan Yin smiled. It was not a warm smile. 3 months ago, 12,000 ships came to enslave us. 200 left. We had prepared for this war for 300 years. We will prepare for the next one for 300 more if necessary. She looked at each representative in turn. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to be left in peace. But if anyone threatens us again, if anyone tries to enslave us or our allies, they will face the same fate as the Velrak. Her voice hardened. Let this be our introduction to the galaxy. Humanity does not start wars, but we end them. Back on Earth, Admiral Kongte watched the speech from his home. He had retired after the battle, his work complete. The man who had led humanity through its greatest trial was now an old soldier, tending a small garden. Captain Li Hun, now promoted to admiral, visited him often. Today they watched Kuan Yun's speech together. Do you think they'll listen? Heian asked. Tay considered the question. Some will. Others will test us again. That's the nature of things, and we'll be ready. We'll always be ready. Tay smiled slightly. That's what our ancestors taught us. Hope for peace. Prepare for war. In space, the defense platforms powered down but remained watchful. Ghostwing continued their patrols. The reserve fleet returned to their hidden positions in the asteroid belt. Humanity's defenses settled into a watchful rest. But across the galaxy, things were changing. The Velrak Dominion faced rebellions on 100 worlds. Their fleet was rebuilding, but their reputation was destroyed. Species that had feared them for millennia now saw them differently. The masters could be beaten. The chains could be broken. On Talar Prelate, Voss returned home a hero. He stood before his people and told them what the human ambassador had said. Freedom was not given. It was earned. The Talari earned it. With human weapons, human training, and human allies, they drove the Velrak from their world. Other species followed. The Dominion, once spanning 300 systems, began to shrink. 10 years after the battle, Ambassador Kuan Yin addressed the newly formed Free Species Alliance. 20 worlds had joined, all former slaves who had won their freedom. Humanity was not their ruler. They were their ally. Came to the stars hoping to find friends, Kuan Yin told them. Instead, we found slaves and tyrants. We could have hidden from this reality. We could have protected only ourselves. But our ancestors taught us something important. She looked at the representatives from 20 free worlds. The only peace worth having is one built on freedom. And freedom must be defended. On Earth, children learned about the Battle of Seoul in their schools. They learned about Admiral Kongte, who had stayed calm when 12,000 ships came to enslave them. They learned about the Ghostwing, who struck first. They learned about the Soul Doctrine, built over 300 years of quiet preparation, and they learned the warning that their species now gave to the galaxy. We do not seek war, but we do not fear it either. In his garden, Admiral Kongte heard the news of each new world that won its freedom. He smiled at each report, then returned to his flowers. The galaxy was changing. Humanity had changed it, not through conquest, but through example, by showing that even the strongest could be defeated if you were willing to prepare, to sacrifice, and to fight. The Velrak had ignored a warning. The galaxy had learned from their mistake, and humanity stood ready, as always, for whatever came next.